The morning light filtered through the cream-colored curtains as Rita adjusted her reading glasses, carefully applying moisturizer to her wife Mi's thin arms. It was their usual morning routine, one they perfected over the past 3 years since Mi's Alzheimer's diagnosis. The gentle whir of their old ceiling fan provided a soothing backdrop as Rita hummed softly, something she did to keep Mi calm during their morning care routine. But today was different. As Rita's fingers moved across Mi's skin, her heart suddenly skipped a beat. There, just below Mi's elbow, was a cluster of marks that hadn't been there the day before. They weren't the typical bruises that sometimes appeared when Mi had accidentally bumped into furniture. No, these were different, evenly spaced, like fingerprints, forming a pattern that made Rita's stomach churn. 25 years as a nurse at Toronto General had taught Rita to trust her instincts, and right now, every fiber of her being was screaming that something was terribly wrong. She grabbed her phone from the bedside table, hands trembling slightly as she took photos of the marks. Mi looked up at her with those beautiful brown eyes, still sparkling despite the fog of confusion that often clouded them. "Everything okay, honey?" Mi asked, one of her increasingly rare moments of clarity making Rita's heart ache even more. "Just making sure I'm not missing any dry spots," Rita replied, forcing a smile. She couldn't bear to upset Mi, not when mornings were usually their best time together. As Rita helped Mi into her favorite blue cardigan, the one she'd worn on their first date to the art gallery 15 years ago, her mind raced through the past few weeks. There had been subtle changes in Mi's behavior that she attributed to the progression of the disease. The way Mi would flinch when certain people entered the room. Her reluctance to be left alone with their part-time caregiver, Dev, even though he'd been helping them for 6 months now. Rita had hired Dev through a highly recommended agency when things became too overwhelming to manage alone. Between maintaining her part-time nursing job at the clinic and providing round-the-clock care for Mi, she'd been running on empty. Dev had seemed like a godsend, professional, experienced, and with glowing references. He came 4 hours each day, giving Rita time to work her shift at the clinic, run errands, or simply catch her breath. Walking Mi to the kitchen for breakfast, Rita's mind wandered to the security cameras she'd installed when Mi first started wandering. They were supposed to keep Mi safe, but now Rita wondered if they might reveal something else entirely. The thought made her hands shake as she poured Mi's morning tea, orange pekoe with a splash of milk, just the way she liked it. "Remember when we used to have breakfast at that little cafe by the lake?" Mi asked suddenly, another spark of memory brightening her face. "You always ordered those terrible blueberry scones." Rita laughed softly, grateful for this moment of connection. They weren't terrible. Just creative. She reached across the table and squeezed Mi's hand, noticing how her wife's fingers curled trustingly around her own. The simple gesture nearly broke her. After settling Mi in her favorite armchair with a photo album, an activity that could still hold her attention on good days, Rita pulled out her laptop. Her eye caught the framed photo on the desk, their wedding day, both of them beaming in matching white dresses, surrounded by cherry blossoms in High Park. She'd promised to protect Mi that day, in sickness and in health. Now, seeing those marks, that promise felt more important than ever. With trembling fingers, Rita pulled up the security camera footage from the past week. As their old desktop computer hummed to life, she glanced at Mi, peacefully turning pages in the photo album, occasionally stopping to trace a face or smile at a memory. Rita took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she might find. She had to know the truth, no matter how difficult it might be to face. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, casting long shadows across their living room floor. Outside, the city was waking up, but inside their cozy bungalow, time seemed to stand still as Rita clicked play on the first video file, her heart pounding with each passing second. Rita's hands grew cold as she watched the security footage. Something wasn't right. The videos showed strange gaps, chunks of missing time during Dev's shifts. At first, she thought it might be a technical problem. Maybe the old system was acting up. But the pattern was too consistent. The gaps always happened at the same times, during Dev's 4-hour visits. She got up to make another cup of tea, her mind racing. Through the kitchen window, she could see Mrs. Kumar from next door tending to her roses. Everything looked so normal outside. Kids riding their bikes to school, the mailman making his rounds. But inside, Rita's world was starting to crack. "I think I made a mistake with the cameras," she whispered to herself, slumping against the counter. She placed them in the main areas, living room, kitchen, hallways, but not in the bedrooms or bathrooms for privacy. Now she wondered if that decision had left dangerous blind spots. The kettle whistled, making her jump. In the living room, she could hear Mai talking softly to herself, probably still looking at the photo album. Rita checked her watch. It was almost time for Dev's shift. Her stomach churned at the thought. She pulled out her phone and called the clinic. "Linda? It's Rita. I need to take some personal days." Her voice cracked slightly. Linda, her supervisor of 10 years, didn't ask questions. She knew Rita never took time off unless it was important. After hanging up, Rita sat at the kitchen table and made a list. Her nursing training kicked in. Document everything. Be thorough. Stay objective. She wrote down all the changes she'd noticed in May over the past months. The way her wife had stopped singing along to their favorite oldies station when Dev was around. How she'd begun having more anxiety attacks, especially before his shifts. Rita flipped through her phone's photo gallery, finding pictures from 3 months ago. Mai looked different then, more relaxed, smiling more. Recent photos showed subtle changes, tighter expressions, less eye contact. How had she missed these signs? A knock at the door made her practically jump out of her skin. It was just the building maintenance man, coming to fix their squeaky bathroom faucet. Rita let him in, watching how Mai remained calm in his presence. No flinching, no anxiety. It was only with Dev. While the maintenance man worked, Rita made a few more calls. First to a local electronics store, then to her old friend Pat, who worked in security systems. She needed better cameras, ones that couldn't be tampered with. Pat understood immediately, promised to come by that evening. Looking at the clock, Rita realized she had 2 hours before Dev's shift. She went to sit beside May, who was now dozing in her armchair, the photo album open on her lap. Rita gently took her wife's arm, examining the marks again. In the bright afternoon light, she could see faint older bruises too, yellowing underneath the skin. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, kissing May's forehead. "I should have noticed sooner." May stirred slightly but didn't wake. Rita pulled out her notebook again. She needed a plan. She couldn't just fire Dev, not without proof. If she was wrong, they'd lose a caregiver they desperately needed. If she was right, well, she needed evidence that would stand up in court. The maintenance man finished up and left, giving Rita a friendly wave. She forced a smile, then went back to her planning. First, the new cameras. Then she'd need to start keeping detailed logs of everything. Times, dates, behaviors. She'd learned about elder abuse during her nursing training, knew how important documentation would be. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dev saying he'd be there in an hour. Rita took a deep breath, steeling herself. She'd have to act normal, pretend everything was fine. But things were far from fine. As she watched Mai sleeping peacefully in her chair, Rita made a silent promise. She would get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. Nobody was going to hurt the love of her life and get away with it. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room as Rita waited, her heart heavy, but her determination growing stronger with each passing minute. The real investigation was about to begin. The tiny red light on the new hidden camera blinked silently from behind the bookshelf. Rita had spent the past week transforming their home into a subtle surveillance system. Pat had helped her install everything properly. tiny cameras disguised as ordinary objects, motion sensors that sent alerts to her phone, and audio recorders carefully placed throughout the house. It felt strange, turning their cozy home into a monitoring station, but Rita knew it was necessary. She kept a small notebook in her pocket now, jotting down everything. The time Dev arrived, what Maya ate, how she acted before and after his visits. Even the smallest details went into that little blue notebook. 8:15 a.m. Mai refuses breakfast. Keeps looking at the door. 2:30 p.m. Found another bruise on left wrist. 4:45 p.m. Me crying in bathroom, won't say why. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. When Dev arrived each day, Rita would smile and chat like always, her heart pounding as she gathered her things to leave for work. But she never really left anymore. Instead, she'd drive around the block and park behind Mrs. Kumar's house, watching the live feed from the cameras on her tablet, taking notes until her hands cramped. "You look tired, dear," Mrs. Kumar said one afternoon, bringing Rita a thermos of hot chai as she sat in her car. The elderly neighbor had become Rita's unexpected ally, offering her driveway as a surveillance spot and never asking too many questions. She just seemed to understand. "Thanks," Rita whispered, her eyes glued to the tablet screen. She watched Dev moving through their house, his behavior completely different when he thought no one was watching. Gone was the gentle caregiver, replaced by someone who moved impatiently, spoke harshly. The audio recordings were the worst. Rita had to stop several times while reviewing them, her hands shaking too hard to write. The way Dev snapped at Mai when she got confused, the mocking tone he used, the threats disguised as jokes, it made Rita's blood boil. One particularly difficult afternoon, Rita watched through tears as Mai reached for her favorite photo album, the one thing that still brought her joy. Dev yanked it away, telling her she'd already looked at it too many times that day. Rita bit her knuckles to keep from screaming at the screen, forcing herself to document everything instead of rushing in. "Patient shows signs of increasing anxiety," she wrote in her notebook, trying to keep her handwriting steady. "Visible flinching when caregiver approaches. Withdrawal from previously enjoyed activities." Her nursing background helped her stay clinical, even as her heart broke. Each night, after Dev left, Rita would spend hours organizing her notes, downloading footage, and creating backup copies of everything. She stored it all in a secure cloud account Pat had helped her set up. No one could delete this evidence, not Dev, not anyone. The toll of constant vigilance was starting to show. Rita barely slept anymore, jumping at every noise in the night. She'd lost weight, her clothes hanging loose on her frame. But she couldn't stop. Not when she'd catch glimpses of the old Mai shining through in the evenings, after Dev was gone. "Remember our first apartment?" Mai asked one night as Rita helped her get ready for bed. "The one with the creaky floors and that funny-shaped window." Her eyes were clear for a moment, full of love. These precious moments of lucidity kept Rita going, reminded her why she had to see this through. "That window looked like a heart," Rita replied softly, gently brushing Mi's hair. "And the super never did fix those floors." But then Mi's eyes clouded over again, the memories slipping away like water through fingers. Rita watched her wife retreat back into confusion, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of documenting, another day of pretending, another day of fighting to protect the woman she loved. As she tucked Mia into bed that night, Rita reviewed her growing file of evidence. 2 weeks of footage, dozens of pages of notes, photographs of bruises, and audio recordings, all building a case that nobody could ignore. But as she looked at her sleeping wife's troubled face, Rita knew she couldn't wait much longer. The time for just watching and documenting was coming to an end. Soon, she would have to act. The waiting room of Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario felt too quiet, almost stuffy. Rita clutched her folder of evidence close to her chest. 3 weeks of documentation, all neatly organized. Her hands trembled slightly as she watched the clock tick past 2:30. Somewhere across town, Dev was starting his shift with Mai. Mrs. Kumar had promised to stay with them today, pretending she just dropped by for tea. Mrs. Chen, a gentle voice called. Rita looked up to see a kind-faced woman in her 50s, wearing a warm sweater that reminded her of something a grandmother would wear. I'm Dorothy from the support team. Please come in. The office was cozy, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. Rita sank into one, suddenly feeling the weight of all those sleepless nights. Dorothy didn't rush her, just waited patiently as Rita gathered her thoughts. I'm probably overreacting. Rita started, then stopped herself. No, she'd promised herself she wouldn't downplay this anymore. She opened her folder, spreading out the photographs, timeline notes, and a USB drive containing the video footage. Dorothy leaned forward, studying the bruised photographs with professional calmness. You did the right thing by documenting everything, she said softly. Many people just rush in and confront the abuser, which often makes things worse. Rita felt tears forming in her eyes. I wanted to. Every time I watched him be rough with her, or heard him mocking her. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. But I knew I needed more than just my word against his. For the next hour, they went through everything. Dorothy took notes, asked careful questions, and explained the proper steps for reporting abuse. Confronting him directly could put both you and your wife at risk, she explained. We need to handle this through the right channels. They developed a plan together. First, they'd file a formal complaint with the caregiving agency. Then, with the police's elder abuse unit. Dorothy made some calls right there, speaking to people she knew in both organizations. Rita felt a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, she wasn't carrying this burden alone. What about May? Rita asked, her voice cracking. She gets so confused now. Will she have to testify or answer questions? Dorothy shook her head. The video evidence is very strong. We'll need to interview her, but we can do it gently, with a specialist who understands dementia. Your documentation might be enough on its own. As they talked, Dorothy pulled out pamphlets about support groups and legal services. She explained how the investigation would work, what to expect, and most importantly, how to keep Mai safe during the process. We can help you find a new caregiver immediately, Dorothy said. Someone specifically trained in dementia care, who's been thoroughly vetted. You shouldn't have to handle all this alone. Rita nodded, thinking about all the times she'd felt overwhelmed, guilty about needing help with May's care. I just wanted her to be safe, she whispered. I trusted the agency to send someone good. Unfortunately, some people are very good at hiding their true nature, Dorothy replied. But you noticed the signs. You took action. You're protecting her. Before she left, Dorothy helped Rita make a safety plan. They arranged for a police officer to be nearby tomorrow when Rita told the agency she was firing Dev. They set up a schedule for check-ins and support visits. For the first time in weeks, Rita felt like she could breathe. Walking to her car, Rita checked her phone. 3 messages from Mrs. Kumar. Mai is fine. We're looking at old magazines. She's smiling. Take your time. Rita sat in her car for a moment, looking at the stack of resource papers Dorothy had given her. Tomorrow would be hard, but now she had a plan, support, and most importantly, hope. She started the engine, eager to get home to Mai. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft pinks and purples, the same colors as their first sunset together, all those years ago. We're going to be okay, she whispered to herself, pulling out of the parking lot. Both of us. We're going to be okay. The moment of truth arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. Rita sat in a small conference room at the police station, surrounded by 3 detectives and Dorothy from Elder Abuse Prevention. On the large screen in front of them, the footage from Rita's hidden cameras began to play. The first clip showed Dev roughly grabbing Mia's arm during a morning routine. Stop being difficult. His voice crackled through the speakers. Rita's hands clenched into fists as she watched Mai shrink away, confusion and fear visible on her face. "We've seen enough patterns here to build a solid case," the lead detective said, pausing the video. Her voice was firm but gentle, understanding how hard this was for Rita to watch. The detective had spent 20 years working with elderly abuse victims, and she'd rarely seen such thorough documentation. More clips played, each one worse than the last. Dev forcing me to sit for hours without moving, denying her water, mocking her when she couldn't remember simple things. The worst was watching him restrain her arms when she reached for her beloved photo albums, causing those telling bruises Rita had first discovered. "Look at the timestamp patterns," Dorothy pointed out. He deliberately chose times when he thought nobody would check the regular security cameras. She highlighted sections showing Dev tampering with the original camera system, creating those suspicious gaps Rita had noticed. Rita felt sick watching the footage, but she forced herself to stay strong. Each clip was another piece of evidence, another reason why she'd done the right thing by investigating. The detectives took notes, occasionally pausing the video to discuss specific incidents. "The psychological abuse is just as concerning as the physical," one detective noted, referencing a clip where Dev threatened to tell Rita that Mai was being bad if she didn't comply with his demands. "He's using her confusion and fear against her." Dorothy reached over and squeezed Rita's hand as a particularly difficult scene played out. The footage showed Mai having an anxiety attack, begging to call Rita, while Dev just laughed and told her she was being dramatic. "I should have known sooner," Rita whispered, wiping tears from her eyes. "All those times she tried to tell me in her own way." "You did know," Dorothy reminded her gently. "Your instincts picked up on the signs. That's why we're here now." The lead detective turned off the screen, having seen enough. "We're dealing with a pattern of calculated abuse," she explained. "He chose vulnerable patients, learned the schedules, and manipulated the situation to avoid detection. Until you installed those hidden cameras, Mrs. Chen." Rita thought about Mai at home right now, safe with their new caregiver, a gentle woman recommended by Dorothy's organization, who sang old songs with Mai and never rushed her through activities. The difference in Mi's behavior was already noticeable after just a few days. "There's something else you should know," the second detective said, opening a folder. "We found 2 previous complaints against Dev at other agencies. They were buried in the system, marked as unsubstantiated because there wasn't enough evidence. Your documentation changes everything." Rita felt a mix of emotions wash over her: relief that she hadn't imagined things, anger at the system that had let this continue, and determination to see justice done. The footage might be hard to watch, but it told a truth that couldn't be ignored. "What happens next?" Rita asked, straightening her shoulders. She needed to know every step, to be prepared for whatever came next. The lead detective outlined the process. Formal charges would be filed, Dev would be arrested, and the case would move through the legal system. They had enough evidence to pursue serious charges of elder abuse and assault. "You've protected not just your wife, but potentially many others," Dorothy added softly. "Cases like this help change policies, improve screening processes." As the meeting wrapped up, Rita gathered her things, feeling both drained and strengthened. The truth was finally out, captured in undeniable video evidence. Walking to her car, she thought about Mai waiting at home, probably sharing tea and cookies with their new caregiver, looking at those beloved photo albums without fear. The spring breeze carried the scent of blooming cherry blossoms, just like their wedding day. Rita took a deep breath, knowing that while the road ahead might be challenging, the worst was behind them. The truth had come to light, and with it, the chance for healing could finally begin. The courthouse hallway felt endless as Rita walked beside their family lawyer, Mrs. Wong. The click of their shoes echoed against the marble floors. It had been 2 weeks since Dev's arrest, and today was the first hearing. Rita's stomach was in knots, but her steps were steady. "Remember," Mrs. Wong said softly, adjusting her glasses, You don't need to look at him. Just focus on the judge. She'd been handling elder abuse cases for 30 years, but this one had touched her deeply. The evidence was overwhelming, thanks to Rita's careful documentation. Before entering the courtroom, Rita checked her phone. A new picture from their neighbor showed Mai in the garden with their new caregiver, Joy. They were planting spring flowers together, Mi's face peaceful as she patted soil around a young petunia. These little updates helped Rita get through the legal proceedings. Inside the courtroom, Rita's breath caught in her throat. Dev sat at the defendant's table, wearing a neat suit that made him look nothing like the monster in those videos. He tried to catch her eye, but Rita looked straight ahead, remembering Mrs. Wong's advice. The prosecutor, a determined woman in her 40s, began presenting the case. On the courtroom screens, carefully selected clips from Rita's hidden cameras played. The judge watched intently, his expression growing darker with each scene. The defendant systematically abused his position of trust, the prosecutor explained, her voice clear and firm. The evidence shows a pattern of both physical and psychological abuse against a vulnerable person with dementia. Rita forced herself to breathe steadily as more evidence was presented. Medical reports detailing Mi's bruises. Testimony from Dorothy about the psychological impact of abuse on dementia patients. Reports from the caregiving agency about Dev's falsified credentials. Then came the surprise. 2 other families stepped forward with similar stories. They'd been too afraid to speak up before, lacking the kind of evidence Rita had gathered. Dev's lawyer tried to paint it all as misunderstandings, but the videos spoke for themselves. During a brief recess, Rita stepped into the hallway, needing air. That's when she saw them. 3 other couples, waiting quietly on the benches. Former clients of Dev's come to support the case. One elderly man gripped his wife's hand tightly, nodding at Rita with tears in his eyes. No words were needed. They understood each other's pain. Back in the courtroom, Mrs. Wong presented documentation from Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, showing how cases like this often went unreported. My client's actions, she said, gesturing to Rita, shed light on a broader problem in our healthcare system. Dev's lawyer tried to argue for leniency, claiming his client was overworked and stressed, but the judge wasn't having it. The systematic nature of this abuse, he said gravely, shows clear premeditation. When the judge announced Dev would be held without bail until trial, Rita felt her shoulders relax for the first time in hours. Mrs. Wong squeezed her arm gently. It wasn't over, but it was a start. Outside the courthouse, standing in the warm afternoon sun, Rita checked her phone again. Another picture from home. Mi napping peacefully in her favorite chair, a new quilt tucked around her shoulders. Joy had been a blessing, treating Mai with the dignity and patience she deserved. You did good in there, Mrs. Wong said, helping Rita gather her files. The hard part's over. Now we focus on making sure this never happens to another family. Rita nodded, thinking about those other couples in the hallway. They'd exchanged numbers, planning to start a support group. Something positive had to come from all this pain. Driving home, Rita took the long way past the cherry blossom trees in High Park where she and May got married. The trees were budding again, promising new beginnings. She thought about how far they'd come since that first morning when she discovered the bruises. Pulling into their driveway, Rita could see May through the window, arranging flowers with joy. Her wife looked up, smiled, and waved, a moment of recognition that meant everything. The legal battle wasn't over, but they were safe. They were healing. And most importantly, they were together. The living room was filled with familiar faces one Sunday afternoon. Mrs. Kumar sat near the window, arranging cookies on a plate. Joy, their new caregiver, was helping Mai show everyone her favorite photos. The elderly couple from down the street, the Paddles, brought homemade samosas. Rita's cousin, Lai Wei, had driven in from Vancouver, determined to help however she could. We should have done this sooner, Mrs. Kumar said softly to Rita as they watched the scene unfold. Created this support network, I mean. She'd been the first to suggest bringing everyone together, turning their quiet house into a hub of caring activity. The idea had started small, just a few neighbors checking in. But word spread through their tight-knit community. People wanted to help, needed to feel useful. Now they had a schedule posted on the fridge, color-coded, and organized. Someone was always available to sit with Mai when Rita needed to attend court proceedings or just take a breather. Mr. Patel, a retired teacher, discovered Mai loved listening to old Hindi songs. Every Wednesday afternoon, he'd bring his vintage radio, and they'd listen together. Mai might not understand the words, but the melodies made her smile. His wife taught Rita to make simple Indian dishes that Mai could easily eat on her confused days. The local senior center heard about their story and reached out. They started a special program for couples dealing with dementia, focusing on music therapy and gentle exercises. Rita watched as Mai participated in a chair yoga session, her movements slow but purposeful, surrounded by others who understood. "Remember when we thought we had to handle everything alone?" Lai Wei asked, helping Rita prepare tea in the kitchen. The counter was covered with casserole dishes, the community's way of making sure they never had to worry about cooking after long days. Joy had turned out to be more than just a caregiver. She brought warmth and laughter back into their home, teaching everyone little tricks for connecting with Mai. "It's not about correcting her memories," Joy explained during one of their group gatherings. "It's about joining her journey wherever her mind takes her." The transformation in Mai was remarkable. With constant companionship and gentle care, her anxiety decreased. The nightmares that had plagued her after Dev's abuse began to fade. She still had difficult days, moments of confusion and fear, but now there was always someone there to help her through them. Rita found unexpected support too. The other families from the courthouse had formed a weekly support group, meeting in a cozy room at the community center. They shared stories, advice, and sometimes just sat together in understanding silence. Their collective experience was turning into something powerful, a voice for change. One particularly beautiful evening, everyone gathered in their backyard. Mrs. Kumar's grandchildren had helped string up fairy lights in the trees. Someone brought a small Bluetooth speaker, playing soft jazz, the kind Mai and Rita used to dance to in their kitchen. Watching her wife surrounded by so much love, Rita felt tears welling up. Mai was having a good day, telling fractured but happy stories about their past to anyone who would listen. The neighborhood kids sat at her feet, enchanted by her tales, not minding when she repeated herself or mixed up details. "You've created something beautiful here," Joy said, bringing Rita a cup of tea. "This isn't just about caregiving anymore. It's about community, about showing what's possible when people come together." The sun was setting, casting warm golden light across their gathered family, blood relatives and chosen family alike. Someone started singing an old love song, others joining in softly. Mai reached for Rita's hand, her eyes clear for a moment, full of recognition and love. Rita squeezed her wife's hand gently, looking around at their circle of support. They weren't just getting through each day anymore. They were building something meaningful. Every person there had brought their own gifts: time, food, music, stories, patience, understanding. Together, they'd created a safety net of love that caught them all. As evening settled in, Rita realized they'd found something precious in the aftermath of trauma. Not just healing, but a deeper connection to their community. The lights twinkled in the trees, voices murmured softly, and Mai's gentle laughter floated on the breeze, proof that even in the darkest times, light could find its way back in. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as Joy demonstrated a new technique she'd learned at a caregiving workshop. "It's all about gentle transitions," she explained, showing Rita how to help Mai move from one activity to another without causing anxiety. Mai sat nearby, contentedly arranging colorful magnetic tiles on a board, a new activity recommended by their occupational therapist. 6 months had passed since the court hearings began. The healing process was slow but steady, like watching a garden grow after a long winter. Some days brought beautiful moments of clarity, while others still carried shadows of the past. But now they had tools, understanding, and most importantly, hope. "Watch this," Joy said softly, setting a gentle timer with wind chime sounds. Instead of just telling her it's time to stop, we let the music guide her. When the chimes played, Mai looked up naturally, ready for the next activity. No force, no fear, just easy transitions marked by peaceful sounds. Rita took careful notes in a new notebook, this one decorated with butterfly stickers, nothing like the stark medical notes she'd kept during the investigation. These pages were filled with progress, with little victories. Mai slept through the night, laughed during morning exercises, remembered our wedding song. The trauma counselor, who specialized in dementia care, visited twice a week. She taught them all, Rita, Joy, and their support network, how to recognize triggers and create safe spaces. The house had been rearranged thoughtfully. The spot where Dev used to restrain Mai was now a cozy reading nook, filled with soft pillows and happy photos. Time doesn't just heal, the counselor had explained. We have to actively create new positive associations. So they did. Every difficult memory was gradually replaced with a gentle new one. The bathroom where Mai used to hide became her favorite place to look at pictures of butterflies they'd stuck on the walls. The chair where she'd sat for hours, afraid to move, was now where she did her morning stretches with Mrs. Kumar. Physical healing came hand in hand with emotional recovery. The bruises had faded, but rebuilding trust took patience. They discovered that music helped enormously. Old love songs, classical pieces, even the silly tunes the neighborhood kids taught her, they all brought light back to Mai's eyes. One breakthrough came during a rainy afternoon. Mai was having a difficult day, her memories particularly clouded. But when Mr. Patel started playing an old song on his radio, she suddenly perked up. "We danced to this," she said clearly, looking at Rita. "At that little restaurant with the red curtains." Rita had cried then. Happy tears this time. They'd recreated that dance right there in the living room, swaying gently while their friends hummed along. Joy had captured the moment on her phone, adding it to their growing collection of healing memories. The support group continued to meet, but now their discussions included success stories alongside the hard times. Rita shared their progress, hoping it would help others. "It's like putting together a puzzle," she told them. "Each piece of healing matters, no matter how small." They learned to celebrate tiny victories. The first time, Mai felt comfortable being alone in a room again. The day she reached for her photo album without hesitation. The morning she greeted Joy with a genuine smile, no trace of fear in her eyes. The house itself seemed to be healing too. Fresh flowers appeared regularly on the windowsills, gifts from neighbors and friends. The walls, once witnesses to hidden crimes, now echoed with gentle laughter and soft conversations. Even the creaky floorboard by the kitchen, which used to make Mai jump, became just another familiar sound of home. One evening, as Rita helped Mai get ready for bed, her wife looked at her with surprising clarity. "You saved me," she said simply, touching Rita's cheek. "I'd remember being scared, and then you made it better." Rita held her close, breathing in the lavender scent of Mai's favorite lotion. "We saved each other," she whispered, "and we're getting stronger every day." That night, like many nights now, Mai slept peacefully. The nightmares that had plagued her were gradually being replaced by sweeter dreams. In the soft glow of their bedside lamp, Rita watched her wife's gentle breathing, thankful for every small step forward, every moment of peace they'd reclaimed together. 1 year after that first discovery of bruises, Rita stood at a podium in the community center, facing a room full of healthcare workers, caregivers, and families. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady as she shared their story. Mai sat in the front row with Joy, proudly holding a small bouquet of flowers the neighborhood kids had picked for her. Change starts with one voice, Rita began, but it grows stronger when we all speak together. The room was packed, people standing along the walls, some wiping tears as she described their journey from fear to healing, from isolation to community. What had started as their personal struggle had grown into something much bigger. The support group they'd formed now had chapters in 3 other cities. Their story had caught the attention of local healthcare authorities, leading to major policy changes in home care services. Mrs. Wang, their lawyer, sat nearby with a thick folder of new regulations they'd helped create. Background checks were now more thorough. Surveillance gaps had to be reported immediately. Training for dementia care workers had been completely revamped, with a special focus on recognizing and preventing abuse. "We're not just protecting our loved ones," Rita explained, gesturing to the crowd. "We're changing the system that failed them." The caregiving agency that had employed Dev now required cameras in all client homes, with regular monitoring by an independent review board. Their community support network had become a model for other neighborhoods. Mrs. Kumar stood up to share how they'd organized their volunteer schedule, showing others how to create similar support systems. The Paddles talked about their music therapy sessions, which had grown into a weekly program at the senior center. Joy had started teaching workshops for other caregivers, sharing the gentle techniques that had helped Mai heal. "It's not just about physical care," she demonstrated. "It's about dignity, about seeing the person behind the illness." The changes rippled outward. Local police departments adopted new training protocols for handling elder abuse cases. Hospitals improved their screening procedures. Senior centers started hosting regular seminars on recognizing warning signs and reporting concerns. During a break, Rita watched May interact with the crowd. Though her memories still came and went like waves, her smile was genuine, her movements relaxed. A year ago, such a gathering would have overwhelmed her. Now, surrounded by their extended family of supporters, she bloomed. "Remember when we thought we were alone in this?" Lai Wei asked, bringing Rita a cup of tea. They looked around the room at all the faces, some familiar, some new, all connected by a shared commitment to protecting vulnerable seniors. The neighborhood kids had created posters for the event, bright drawings of hearts and helping hands. They'd learned valuable lessons too, about kindness, about standing up for others, about how a community could heal together. As the afternoon wound down, Rita shared their latest initiative, a scholarship fund for training compassionate caregivers. Named in Mi's honor, it would help ensure that future care workers would be properly trained, thoroughly vetted, and truly committed to their vital role. "This isn't the end of our story," Rita concluded, holding Mi's hand. "It's just the beginning of something bigger." The room erupted in applause, but what meant more were the quiet nods of understanding, the determined looks that said, "We'll carry this forward." Later that evening, their backyard filled once again with friends and neighbors. The fairy lights twinkled in the trees, music played softly, and the air was filled with gentle conversation. Mi dozed in her favorite chair, peaceful under the stars. Rita looked around at their gathered family, blood relatives and chosen family alike. From that first terrible discovery had grown something beautiful, a movement of change, a network of protection, a community of healing. As the moon rose over their transformed world, Rita remembered a quote she'd read somewhere. "The greatest changes often start with the smallest acts of courage." Their courage had rippled outward, touching countless lives, creating safer spaces for vulnerable seniors everywhere. The evening breeze carried the scent of Mrs. Kumar's roses and the sound of quiet laughter. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for change. But tonight, in this garden of healing, they all planted together. Everything was exactly as it should be.